I'm sure you've heard of the Gateway Arch, but do you really know what it represents or the story of its design and construction? This monument is not where you'd expect a monument to American curiosity to stand, but there it is, towering over the route American explorers took to find America's future. But then, to celebrate America's future, workers had to dig up the past just to build the monument. The Gateway Arch soars 630 feet, a strange stainless towering monument that makes you wonder, why this shape and why this city? St. Louis, Missouri certainly isn't the most well-known American metropolis, and why, after 60 years, does this monument still hold a secret most Americans have never heard, and a story as long as the mighty Mississippi? In the early 19th century, St. Louis was not what you'd call a great American city. It was a border town, a French Creole settlement perched on the edge of everything the young United States had ever known, and the beginning of everything it had yet to really discover. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson executed one of the most audacious land deals in human history. For approximately $15 million, roughly 4 cents per acre, the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon Bonaparte's France, effectively doubling the size of our young nation overnight. St. Louis sat almost exactly on the eastern seam of the Louisiana Purchase. It was the last civilized outpost before those who dared entered the complete unknown, the literal gateway to what would soon be dubbed the Wild West. And it was from these muddy riverbanks that Lewis and Clark launched a specialized U.S. Army unit called the Corps of Discovery in May of 1804, pressing deep into a continent most Americans had never seen. More than a century later, the city of St. Louis decided to build a monument to all that bold discovery, a tribute to Jefferson, to westward expansion, and the idea of American possibility. The first step to that monument would be a national design competition, and in oh-so-American fashion, the winner was not even an American. His name was Eero Saarinen, Finnish-born, obsessively perfectionist, and he would conceive a structure so mathematically precise, so geometrically daring, that engineers openly doubted it could even be built. That's how American curiosity goes beyond the postcard. We go inside the design, inside the construction, and inside the contradictions of a monument that celebrates freedom on ground where that freedom was taken from some. But before we get into any of that, before we get to the construction crews who worked without a single fatality on one of the most technically complex structures ever attempted, we need to understand one crucial thing: the shape. Because the Gateway Arch is not just an arch, it's a precise mathematical equation rendered in steel. And the reason Saarinen chose it will change the way you see this monument forever. So we have a Finnish-born architect, a mathematically precise curve, and a city still carrying the weight of its own complicated history. This is where the story gets interesting. The competition to design the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial, what would eventually become the Gateway Arch and its surrounding park, was announced in 1947. More than 170 architects submitted entries. Eero Saarinen worked alongside his father Alil, himself one of the most celebrated architects of the 20th century. As the story goes, both father and son submitted designs for the monument. They worked on opposite sides of the same wall, promising never to come across and peek at each other's work. Eero submitted a design centered on a single soaring curve. The shape Saarinen chose is called a catenary curve, the precise shape a hanging chain takes when suspended freely from 2 points under its own weight. It is, mathematically speaking, the most efficient arch form in existence. Nature arrived at this shape long before human engineers did. Saarinen didn't invent it, he just recognized it. But there's a detail in this story that most tour guides skip. When competition results were initially announced, there was a clerical error. Eero Saarinen received a telegram congratulating one of the Saarinens on the win, and assuming it was addressed to his father, he reportedly drove to his father's studio to celebrate on his behalf, even though the winning entry was his own. Ground was broken in February 1963. What followed was a 4-year engineering undertaking that had never been attempted before and has scarcely been replicated since. The arch consists of 142 prefabricated stainless steel sections, each a double-walled equilateral triangle. The interior and exterior skins are separated by concrete fill at the base, bearing enormous compressive loads, transitioning to a hollow steel structure as it rises. The two legs were constructed simultaneously from the ground up on opposite sides of the monument's footprint, each growing at roughly the same rate. The engineering tolerance required was less than 1/64th of an inch for the two legs to meet precisely at the keystone, 630 feet in the air. Think about that. Two structures rising from separate foundations across more than 600 feet of open air, meeting within the width of a pencil mark. On October 28, 1965, the final keystone section was lowered into place. The two legs, rising from opposite sides, met in the sky almost perfectly. Almost. Because in the final hours of construction, engineers faced a problem that threatened to unravel everything. The solution they found was improvised, audacious, and it worked. October 28, 1965. After more than 3 decades of thinking, planning, and working, the work crews are in position. The final section, the keystone, is being lowered by a creeper crane toward the gap between the two legs. But suddenly, there's a problem, a very significant problem. The morning of the topping out ceremony, the St. Louis sun had been warming the southern leg of the arch all day, and steel expands with heat. So the southern leg had expanded just enough that the gap between the two legs is now too narrow for the keystone to fit. The solution was almost comically practical. The St. Louis Fire Department was called. Firefighters directed high-pressure water hoses onto the southern leg for nearly 2 hours, cooling the steel, contracting it back toward its calculated dimension. The keystone was lowered, and it fit. The achievement is real. The mathematics are breathtaking. The zero fatality construction record on a project of this complexity is remarkable. After all, the company insuring the project projected 13 men might die building the genuinely beautiful monument. All of that is true, but the monument those workers built also carries a quieter, harder story beneath its foundations. One about who this land belonged to, who was displaced to build this park, and what it means to call something a gateway when not everyone was invited through. To clear the 40 acres needed for the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial, the city of St. Louis demolished an entire riverfront neighborhood in the 1930s and 40s, a predominantly African American and working class community whose residents received minimal compensation and were offered little relocation assistance. Some historians estimate that thousands of people were displaced. Their neighborhood was erased brick by brick to make room for a monument to American expansion and freedom. Eero Saarinen never saw his vision completed. He died of a brain tumor in September of 1961, 4 years before the keystone was finally dropped in place. He was just 51 years old. The monument he imagined, this elegant, inevitable curve, would outlive him by decades and will likely outlive all of us. Today, as the centerpiece of Gateway Arch National Park, the monument receives approximately 2 million visitors per year. Those visitors can ride one of the 5 cramped pod-shaped trams, each one engineered specifically for the arch's curved interior, to an observation room at the summit where 16 small windows look out over the Mississippi River Valley to the east and the broad American interior to the west. The view from the top is extraordinary. It is a monument to the ambition of a nation, of a city, its workers, and one architect who imagined a curve that is truly one of a kind. Well, that's the story of the Gateway Arch, the math, the men, the monument, and the questions it still asks of us. If this kind of history, the kind that goes deeper than the postcard, is what you come here for, then you're exactly where you belong. This channel is all about American curiosity. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Please share this episode with someone, and there's plenty more American curiosity. And drop your thoughts in the comments, because on this channel, the conversation is always part of the history.